We hear a lot about psychedelic-assisted therapy, but 3 out of 4 people who choose to consume psychedelics do so at home or in nature with friends or loved ones. I'm April, founder of Set, an integration platform to help you get the most out of your psychedelic experiences. The podcast episode you're about to listen to may reference one of my previous shows, The High Guide or How to Do the Pot, because I've been a trusted source in cannabis and psychedelics since 2015. I invite you to visit getsetset.com and sign up for our newsletter to receive your free guide on set and setting to make the most of your next psychedelic journey. This podcast discusses altered states brought on by cannabis and psychedelics and is intended for listeners 21 and over.
Facilitators are not fixers. Everyone's always looking for somebody to solve their problems. What makes this modality so incredible is that it unlocks our own inner healer, the wisdom within ourselves that knows what needs to happen.
Hey, I'm April Pride. This is the show for women who have an open and curious mind, and this is a show all about women changing their lives thanks to altered states. Have you ever struggled to make sense of a psychedelic experience? Well, that's exactly what we're going to help you with on this week's show and on every weekly episode this season, where you'll learn the significance of integration in psychedelic therapy. And by psychedelic therapy, for the purposes of this season, I mean taking a journey on psilocybin mushrooms specifically. On this season of The High Guide, you'll meet 3 women who we call sister trippers. They're not actually related, but they do actually trip. Each take their own solo journeys on the magical mushrooms and work with a psychedelic facilitator to set an intention prior to the psychedelic experience and integrate following their trip. Don't worry, we're going to cover a lot, but we'll slow roll it out over 10 episodes. We start every episode with our word of the week and end every episode with trip tips. Please continue listening after I sign off because we'll close out each episode this season with a 10-minute excerpt from the High Guide Psyched audio series from last season. Produced in partnership with Patchworks, these exclusive soundscapes are 30 to 60 minutes of guided psychedelic audio journeys. The sounds throughout this episode you're about to hear are sampled from the High Guide's Journey Number 2, episode 26 of this podcast. The first word of the week, psychedelic integration therapy. A therapist or coach who holds space for a psychonaut or sister tripper to unpack psychedelic experiences so as to move toward inner healing and self-love. Applying these insights and guidance gained during a non-ordinary state of consciousness into our daily life. Now I feel like this is the appropriate time to disclose that while I have experience with psychedelics and the like, those experiences have been, as I read in the latest double-blind magazine, what one might refer to as meaningless, meaning without meaning or intention. And the practice of this is referred to as meaninglessness. Loved it. And definitely not with a facilitator. And integration happened over Bloody Marys sometime after 12 noon. I have worked with various healers, including an indigenous shaman, a psychedelic coach, and a psychedelic therapist. But I've never consumed MDMA or LSD or DMT with a facilitator of any kind. Ketamine, I've never consumed at all. So although I've been helping women navigate legal cannabis since 2015, I am by no means an expert in psychedelics, and I'm not a trained facilitator. I'm a podcast host whose curiosity for non-ordinary states of consciousness will not let you down. Neither will the High Guide I've asked to join us this season. She refers to herself as a facilitator, which is synonymous with a coach, and she's not a therapist, nor is she a shaman.
I'm definitely not a shaman. Just want to be very clear about that. Though I respect indigenous traditions, I'm just not a person of that community, so I don't use that language. Really, for me, the best way of looking at it is that I'm a facilitator, right? I hold space and help people so that they can unlock that healer in themselves, because ultimately that's where all the answers lie. So in my role, it's really about making people comfortable, keeping them safe, and being that person that can be present with them in the moment of whatever may come up, right? There's a full range of feelings and emotions that can come up in these experiences, and really just providing that safe, present space for that person to go in as deeply as they need to in order to get the healing that their soul is craving.
The woman you just heard from is Natasha Lannerd. The purpose of this first episode is to introduce you to language related to psychedelic integration and introduce you to Natasha, our high guide on this season's show.
All right, so I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Natasha Lannerd.
I met Natasha in 2018 at the big cannabis conference MJ Biz in Las Vegas. On my final night at the final after party, Natasha, who, like me, was a woman working in weed, and she continues to work for the best edibles brand, not available on the West Coast, 1906. Natasha opens up about her relationship with psychedelic therapy.
I was originally introduced to this as a means of recovering from a significant amount of trauma that I experienced beginning at a really young age that went on for the majority of my life. So I found in my experience that really nothing has worked for me like this work. And so I've dedicated the last 3 years to not only becoming a certified breathwork facilitator, I host and co-facilitate a myriad of different psychedelic experiences, and am overall, in general, an advocate for this work because it works.
And that's what more and more women are finding. It works. What do you mean by works? I don't mean you're fixed. When your ability to love, trust, and heal yourself intensifies, you'll know it's working. And this all starts with, as Natasha explains, cultivating the witness.
I spend a lot of time in contemplation with and just witnessing, cultivating the witness in yourself. Can you give yourself that awareness of just witnessing, not judging, not attaching, just full witnessing? Can be very, very rewarding and incredibly powerful, at least, in my personal experiences and the experiences that I've seen with other people too.
Like in episode 29 of this podcast, when we saw through Natasha's integration of Colton Winger, when she was able to connect Russian dolls that appeared in 2 back-to-back psychedelic experiences with Colton's desire for wholeness.
Have you ever kind of explored more the fact that those dolls that you're seeing are versions of yourself, and we stack them together because the soul is yearning for wholeness. Mm-hmm. But in order to be whole, we have to acknowledge all of these different parts of ourselves.
I mean, thank you so much for offering a different perspective on that, because I'm struggling with this sort of like self-identity crisis. Like, who am I? Like, I'm in this body at this point of time in life, or, in the, what we call, time of life. And just by you saying that gives me so much peace in being compassionate with myself, knowing that we are multifaceted, complex humans. We don't need to figure out what our one version of ourself is. We have different components, different compartments. And the whole concept of like the stacking of the Russian dolls yearning to like come back home, feels very true for me right now.
You can see how Natasha's role as a facilitator in this moment with Colton was to lead him to a place where he could reflect on the Russian dolls as a symbol of where his soul wanted to go, toward wholeness, and not a sign that he's separate and broken. When the emotion that comes with a crisis of self, as Colton explained, he's experiencing, is removed and he simply witnessed what was coming up during the journey, he was able to zero in on a path toward healing rather than choose to see it as a signifier of its deficits. Self-love inspires our inner healer, which helps us live our true soul's story. This is what it means to step into your truth, and it may mean you got to step into some shit, but don't worry, there'll be shrooms under those patties to help it all make sense. Let's continue getting to know our high guide, Natasha.
I'm a person that is committed to being the best version of myself every day. That's who I am. I'm also a person who lost their mom to a brain tumor when they were 6 years old. and had a dad and a lot of family members that had extreme drug and alcohol addiction. That's my story. That's not who I am. Natasha Lannerd is not the story of her mom dying of a brain tumor. My soul is not my story. These things happened for sure, but that's not who I am. And if you ever want to really get through anything in your life, you need to come home to your core essence. And yes, all of the stories are relevant and they shaped you. But if you allow your story to be who you are, how do you change what happened? You can't. You don't have an option to make a new choice. Agency is what gives you a choice. We all should have a very strong sense of agency. Instead of things happening, just happening and we roll over as a human being or whatever, like we should have the agency, especially when it comes to this type of experience. I want to look at my life in a different way. I want to change my perspective. I want to be a better version of myself.
I think we can begin to see that choosing to be the best version of yourself starts with how you choose to talk to yourself or choose to show compassion for yourself. Taking agency over the hand we've been dealt means that we also get to write the story of how significant a role the bad or inconvenient get to play in defining who we are.
I mean, I have 3 autoimmune conditions, and my story is not somebody who is so sick they can't get out of bed. I have to take care of myself. I'm a person who needs to have extra care for themselves and needs to prioritize healthy food, rest, and exercise. I'm not a person who suffers from 3 autoimmune diseases every day. That's not my story. I am not suffering. I am living a life that's focused on health and prioritizing my wellness. Do you see kind of the difference in that?
Totally. Natasha flipped the script.
I say this to myself probably more than any line ever, and it's, you become what you think about all day long. And just like sit with that, right? Like you become what you think about all day long. If all day long I'm thinking about all of these horrible, painful, soul-destroying things that happen to me, that's who I become. And I didn't want that. I did not want that. And frankly, I didn't think my mom, who passed away when I was a child, wanted that for me. That didn't feel right either. And so, yeah, I decided to become something that I've decided to change the way I thought so that my life would change, and it did. New story.
And by decided, what I think Natasha means is she decided to do the work. Most experts agree that the work in psychedelic therapy is integration.
The purpose of integration is kind of like multifaceted, right? It's opportunity to make meaning of the experience, right? Like sometimes it can be very easy to get caught up in the phenomenon of what happened and then find yourself on the other side of it and be like, well, what did it mean? And then kind of, I would say the secondary aspect of integration is like what to do with the information, if there is anything to do.
Oh, there's always something to do, right? And the time is always now.
We have very little time on this earth. I mean, my mom, died 6 days after she turned 36. I'm 36 right now. I have been largely informed by what am I doing with the life that I have? What is my passion in life? And how am I using the life force energy that I have that is animating my body right now to create a life that I feel great about?
A life that I feel great about? Think on that. Are you living a life that you feel great about? Based on what we've heard today, a life you feel great about has everything to do with you, the real you, deep inside there.
Before people tried to sell you stuff, before people told you what was and was not, how to think or whatever conditioning it is. But like at the core, like, who are you? Remembering who you are at that soul level. And these, experiences are such an amazing opportunity to serve as a reminder at beneath all of the stuff that might be a little bit more, surface level and still very important. Don't get me wrong. But at that core, right? Like, we're not our titles. We're not our jobs. We're not what we have accumulated in our life, like at the deepest level. And that presence is really that's the jumping board for diving into that.
I bet you're ready to dive into a few trip tips to close out this episode. Today's trip tips were inspired by Facebook messages shared by Entheo Nation, which I'll link to in the show notes. These 3 insights from coaches will help you make the most of integrating your psychedelic experiences. Trip tips to being a good psychonaut. Number 1. Coaches list this as one of the most challenging situations they face, and that is dealing with people who avoid facing and feeling challenging and uncomfortable material from within their own unconscious. They are instead projecting onto the practitioners, accusing them of not having adequate training or experience. To sum it up, part of being a good psychonaut is owning your shit. Number 2, a coach says that the biggest challenges she sees in training participants are the limiting beliefs that block them, most rooted in the areas they are not yet loving themselves. The heart of all challenges is us, our beliefs in ourselves or lack thereof, and the amount of love and compassion we give ourselves, or don't. And lastly, number 3, before initiating psychedelic therapy, ask yourself, am I open to learning the skills to cooperate with other humans and cooperate with my true self?